In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the AC condenser on this Mazda 6. Let's install this TRQ condenser. Before we start this job, make sure you get your system professionally evacuated, get all the refrigerant out, then you can open the lines. You don't want to open any lines with refrigerant still in the system. From underneath the front of the vehicle, you'll notice this small cover towards the driver's side with an 8mm screw holding it on. We have to remove this in order to drain the coolant. This is the best way to access the petcock. So take an 8mm socket, take this off, and to remove the cover you actually have to slide it forward. It has two little hooks here and here that have to line up with this slot. So once you look up here, you'll see this little piece right here. This is what you're going to want to turn counterclockwise and unscrew it, and then the coolant will drain right through here. So have a collection bucket ready. I have an old piece of coolant hose here that I keep around for this purpose, and I'm going to attach it to the little drain piece on the drain valve here. That way I can direct the flow of the coolant. So as I loosen up this petcock, coolant should start coming out through the end of this hose. This isn't the easiest process, and these sometimes get stuck. Okay, there we go. Loosened up the petcock. Now at this point it's not going to drain any faster until we go up top and remove the radiator cap, because right now it's actually pulling a vacuum. It's trying to empty, but no air can go in. So let's go up and do that. Now from up top under the hood, you'll see the radiator cap right here towards the passenger side in the front. Remove it by turning it counterclockwise. It's going to have two stages to it. This is one and a second. You can hear the air rushing in, and now the coolant will drain a lot faster. Let's remove the radiator overflow tank, or the coolant overflow tank. Take this hose out. A little bit of coolant might drip out, just so you know. And then with a flathead screwdriver, there's going to be a tab on each side that you have to kind of pry out on. I'll show you once this is out. It's hard to see when it's in, but once you pull up on it as you're prying, that should unlock the overflow tank. Do that on each side. There we go. Once this is unlocked, there's a wiring harness that kind of runs through it. Pry it up and out. So these are the tabs on each side, and they basically go into a fork like this. All you have to do is stick the screwdriver here, pry it out. That'll release it as you pull up, and there you have it. Next, let's remove the air intake ducting here. It's got two 10mm bolts holding it on. Remove both. This one comes out. They don't always come out. This one stays in the bushing. Next, we have to remove the top of the air filter housing so we can actually get access to the inside of it where the fresh air duct is secured in. So use a 10mm socket, loosen up this clamp. You don't need to go very far, just enough to get the snorkel piece off. This is fine right here. Then unplug the mass airflow sensor connector. The connector itself, the wire for it, has a retainer down here. To disconnect this, you can take a trim tool and pry in on this tab up top. And then should be another one on the bottom, but that one is going to be quite a bit more difficult to get to, so I'm just going to pry it out at this point. There we go. Remove this wire. Now at the front you'll see two clips. Pull them off and remove the top of the air filter housing. Set that aside and remove your air filter as well. At this point I'm just going to remove the entire airbox. It has three little rubber pieces that it holds onto. You can remove this ducting here if you want. There's two tabs that you have to press in, but this is a lot easier in my opinion and gives me quite a bit more space. Let's disconnect the upper radiator hose. Get a pair of pliers, squeeze the clamp, pull it off. Sometimes these get stuck on here. This clamp does have the ability to lock in the open position. Looks like it's not doing that though, so that's fine. I'm just going to pull it off. And then if the radiator hose is stuck like this, grab your pliers and very gently give it a couple twists. There we go, that breaks it free. Once again, very gentle if you do that. You don't want to damage the hose. Slide it off of the radiator. Just going to leave it here. Now let's unplug the fan connector. There's going to be a tab that you have to press on and then pull on the connector. There are two of these. They're both identical. There's one here, one on the other side. Do the same to the other one. Now we have to unclip the wiring harness from all the retainers so we can pull it away from the fan shroud. Just take a trim tool and pop it free from all of its points that it's secured on. There we go. Okay. Just for more space, I'm going to disconnect this one as well. All right. So this is now sort of free. I can move it out of the way, up and over here, or wherever it needs to be to give us some more slack. Maybe I'll pop these off too. There we go. That's better. To remove that lower radiator hose, I'm going to use some hose clamp pliers. You can use regular pliers if you want. It's just going to be a little trickier to get them in there. Pinch down on that clamp. Once you get that clamp loosened up, you should be able to get the hose off. Now keep in mind, coolant is most likely going to leak out of here when you take this off, just because it's usually stuck in the hose. There we go. Have that collection bucket ready. I'm going to let go of the clamp and get my pliers out of here. Now the fans are held on with two 10mm bolts at the top. This is one of them. Remove it. Okay. That one broke. That's all right. We'll fix that. And another one on the other side. Okay, I got this bolt out, so I only have one to replace. Remove these two. As you can see, now the fans are free from the radiator. So what we have to do now is get this wiring harness out of the way enough to slide the fans up and out. The fans do come out through here. You just have to kind of wiggle them past all of this. Now we can remove the fans. On the passenger side of the engine compartment, you'll see the two AC lines. With two 10mm bolts at the top, we're going to have to disconnect these. The AC condenser and the radiator come out as a unit, unless you want to pull the bumper off and do all that. Just to get to the front of the AC condenser, it's bolted onto the top and the bottom of the radiator with mounting bolts, so it's a little bit trickier to disconnect. Pull both of these bolts out. Try not to break these. A lot of times they get really corroded in here. They're into aluminum lines, so if you can save them, that would be best. There we go. At this point, we're going to have to disconnect these lines. Keep in mind there is a vacuum pulled on the system, so as soon as you pop one off, it's going to hiss. That is not pressure, that is a vacuum. There we go. And the other one. These have rubber hoses on each end, so I'm going to tuck these out of my way, so I can continue working. While we're here, this wiring harness retainer needs to get unclipped from the retainer that it's on, just so we can have space to push this back once we are ready to remove it. There we go. Just push that aside. On each side at the top, you'll have a retainer with a plastic tab that if you push down on and then pull out, this is what locks the radiator and AC condenser into the upper radiator support. There's one on each side that has to be removed. There we go. At this point, with those out, you can push the AC condenser and radiator assembly back. Might have to move that wiring harness. Once it's far back enough, I have to pry it upwards. I'm going to pull the engine cover off just so I can get a little bit of extra space right here. There we go. That's out. Get all these wires out of the way. And now we have to fish these out past all the lines and wires. Be very careful not to break anything on the way out. Coolant might still leak. Keep that in mind. And there it is. Now there are 4 bolts, 10mm in size, all 4 of them that we need to remove to separate the AC condenser from the radiator. There's one in each corner. That one's spinning in the radiator. Let's try this one. I'm going to stick a screwdriver on the side of this one. Yeah, this one I was able to pry out of the radiator, just straight out. There we go. There we go. And there's the AC condenser. Of course, we're going to get new hardware for all this, and the radiator. Now, take the radiator and the AC condenser and put them together. They have some alignment pins at the top that will allow you to basically seat it where it's supposed to be. And then for me, I'm just going to get all new hardware and bolt it up. I'm going to put in all the mounting hardware from the AC condenser to the radiator here. Make sure it's lined up. You do have some wiggle room. If it doesn't line up, it doesn't have to be spot on. Let's do the two top ones. Snug these up. Make sure you double check your radiator petcock to make sure it's tight. You don't need to use pliers on this, just by hand snug it up. That should be good to go, but obviously you don't want to forget it open and then add coolant and it comes right out the bottom. Let's get this back in the vehicle. Now, when it comes time to putting the radiator and AC condenser in, you'll see at the bottom there's some rubber bushings. There's one on each side. They should have stayed on the vehicle side. It is very unlikely that they come out with the radiator. But the radiator has two pins, one on each side, and they have to go into the holes of these bushings. So as you slide it down, it'll be very difficult to see, but you can definitely feel it lock in. So make sure that that happens. Otherwise, it's not going to be seated properly. At the bottom of the radiator, these are the pins that I was referring to. There's one on each side, and these are the ones that have to slide into the rubber bushings. Now pull up on the wiring harness and get the radiator and AC condenser slid down in as an assembly the same way that it came out. Be very careful of your fins, not to damage them, and of course anything else that's in the way, such as wiring harnesses and hoses, lines, anything like that. And as you get down here, you want to kind of tilt the bottom of it so it slides into those alignment bushings that I mentioned. It's going to be kind of a tight fit. Just make sure you don't get any of this caught. Okay, one side is in and the other side dropped down. That's perfect. Now at the top, the radiator should have some bushings. Mine fell off when I was separating the AC condenser from the radiator, so I'm going to get those back on. Slide these back on here. The flat, wider side goes towards the bottom. I'm going to do the same over here. This is what helps lock the radiator in. And at this point, you should be able to push this forward like this, and we will be locking it in with these clips here. Slide them in like this. They have to click. There we go. Just push them in all the way, and that should lock in the radiator up top. Perfect. The radiator is tightly locked in, so that is good to go. Let's get the lower radiator hose back on. I'm going to use my hose clamp pliers again, just because it's a lot easier to get these to clamp on. If your clamp is weak, replace it. This is the time. Mine is a little bit rusty, but it's still in good condition. It has a lot of tension still on it. So slide it over the radiator, bottom it out all the way. It's got a little tab here that it's supposed to bottom out on, and as soon as you're happy with its position, let go of the clamp. Remove your pliers or whatever tool you're using. Double check it. That's properly mounted on there. Grab your fans and slide them in. Be careful of your radiator fins as it goes down. Oh, and the wiring harness, of course. On the bottom, there are a couple tabs that need to, kind of like a fork, they need to line up down in the radiator. Oh, you'll pretty much feel it lock into place because it won't slide around. And then when you put it up against the radiator, it should line up at the top and it should be flush all the way around, which it is. As soon as this is on here, I'm going to start my 2 bolts in. Got some new hardware because this one was in poor condition. On both sides, of course. Once you're happy with the position of the fans, snug these up. About a quarter turn after they bottom out, that's it. You don't need to over tighten these. Otherwise you can break that plastic retainer for the mounting nut in there. Once again, just a little snug after. Perfect. Let's resecure this wiring harness in place now before we move on to anything else. Line up all of the retainer clips that you had to undo and just press them back in. Let's reconnect the electrical connector for the fan. Make sure it clicks. Of course, do that to both fans. There's one on each side. And there's a connector or a retainer here as well. Perfect. Let's reconnect the two AC lines. Replace the O-rings. That's what I always recommend when you disconnect AC lines. And when you put these in, make sure you bottom them out by hand first, the line itself. You don't want to pull this in with the bolt. Otherwise, not only can you bend it, these are aluminum lines, you could also break the bolt in there, strip the threads, and obviously potentially damage the O-ring. All of that is not good. So once the bolts start in, tighten them up. Once you bottom it out, give it about 1/8 of a turn after it bottoms out. That should be plenty tight. This one, there we go. Bottomed out, 1/8 of a turn. That is plenty. You don't want to break these or strip the threads. Let's reinstall the upper radiator hose. Slide it over the radiator, make sure it's bottomed out, and just like at the lower hose, if you need to replace the clamp, this is the time. If not, let's put it right back where it came from. As you can see, the hose is slightly molded to the clamp, and I like to put these back right where they came from so that it gives it the best chance of sealing up that it has. Let's get the overflow tank back in. Slide it under the wire harness here. There we go. And as it slides down, it'll automatically line up with those two tabs that lock it in. Tap it down and put this hose back on. I added a little hose clamp here just because to me this hose felt a little bit too loose for what it was supposed to be, so I just added this. But if your hose is nice and snug on there, there's no need for a hose clamp. Let's reinstall the airbox. Slide it down into position, and it has 3 pins that it needs to line up with. Press it down, those should fall into place, and this should line up as well. Let's reinstall the air filter. This is a great time to replace it if yours is in need of replacement. And then the top of the airbox will have 3 little tabs here that need to line up with 3 brackets. And that's how it locks in on the back side. So as you slide it down into position, you want to make sure that those get lined up. They kind of have to slide in and down. And if it's not seating properly, most likely the air filter is getting in the way. So you want to pull this back off and inspect. Otherwise, you'll have an air leak. There we go. The clamps on the front here should lock in easily. If they don't, that means this is not lined up properly and it's not seated. Let's get this clamp, or the air duct back over and the clamp tightened up. I'm going to do this one by hand as opposed to a power tool because I want to feel how tight it gets. These you don't need to tighten a lot, you just need to snug them up. Once they're snugged up, you shouldn't be able to move this hose around. Perfect. You don't need to go until this stops spinning or bottom it out or anything like that. That would be way too tight for this and it could cause some damage. Last thing over here is going to be the wire for the mass airflow sensor. Resecure it on the back side and plug it in. Make sure that clicks. Let's resecure the fresh air duct with 2 10mm headed bolts. Just snug them up. Perfect. Resecure the engine cover if you took it off. Has 4 little tabs that it mounts on. Just press it on once it lines up. Let's get this cover back on underneath, slide it into position, and reinstall the screw that secures it. Snug it up. Don't make it too tight. It's threading into plastic. Let's add some coolant. I have a spill-proof funnel here. This is also going to help me bleed the system a little bit better because it's now the highest point in the cooling system, so air will naturally want to rise up to the top here. I'm going to add coolant until it stops bubbling. refer to your owner's manual for the appropriate coolant type that this vehicle needs. And I'm just going to keep filling it, like I said, until it stops bubbling. This is just the air naturally rising to the top, filling up the radiator. This just stopped bubbling. I'm going to squeeze on the upper radiator hose. That will usually get a few more air bubbles out of here. At this point, we're going to have to start up the vehicle, let the engine run, let that water pump spin and push out any air that is in the system. And then watch the temperature gauge, make sure it doesn't overheat, of course, make sure your fans come on. So let's go turn it on. Once you've ran the vehicle, temperature is good, fans came on and everything, squeeze the upper radiator hose and plug up your funnel. The reason I squeeze the upper radiator hose is because when I let go and pull my funnel out, it spills less. It'll want to suck in all the coolant that is sitting in here. I'm going to top off the coolant overflow with the rest of this. I still have some in here, so I really don't need a lot. You can see the level on the side of it, right about there. I'm at the full mark. Once again, you want to make sure it's not overfilled. Cap this off. And then I'm going to remove my funnel adapter. Reinstall the radiator cap. Make sure you click it twice. It's got 2 stages to it. And there you have it. Now that the job is done, get your system professionally recharged. You want the perfect amount of refrigerant in there so that the system can function properly.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.